It is No Gifts, Please, the parenting podcast by the pair with no real gifts, but a whole lot of gumption. Hey everyone, I'm Steve Noviello.
And I'm Jenny Anchondo.
And I'm so excited for today's episode because it's all about you, my dear.
Oh no. Oh no. You think you're just going to sit back and relax on this one?
Well, not really. I have to ask the questions, and I have many because I'm so curious. Listen, one of the things that the two of us have been really blessed by is having a platform through journalism, right? I mean, I use my job to help people. I raise awareness about certain things. And that's a really awesome, responsibility. And when we sat down and talked about doing this podcast, the premise was, how can we be of service to other people? You're pregnant. You're very pregnant. I mean, we're like in the home stretch here.
Here we are.
But this has been a journey for you. And I think that, and again, I'm not a woman, and we had our own, obviously, IVF journey with her surrogacy. But one of the things that always kind of that drove me crazy about our process was it just seemed to be working for everyone else. They would have 2 embryos, they would transfer 2 embryos, and 9 months later they had twins, and nobody was talking about the flip side.
Totally. It does. And when you're in that phase, you walk around and everybody is having kids. Yeah. I mean, 2 men are accidentally having kids when you're going through it yourself. I mean, it's just
not accidental.
It does feel so, just like anything, when you're shopping for a car and, all of a sudden you see all of these red cars that other people have that you don't have. It is really just such a bizarre phenomenon. And I think it's important. I understand when people are private about it. Like, I completely get it. I'm typically a pretty private person, but I think that this process has broken me down so severely that I feel like, what is my purpose on earth if I'm not going to at least share some of it or share what I wish I would have known?
So I want to take people kind of back to the beginning because, again, and we've talked about this on the show before, I remember the day that you told me you were pregnant with Brighton. It was about 60 seconds after you got married.
It was?
You got pregnant quickly. Yeah. And I'm guessing a little unexpectedly with the first one, or were you trying?
No, there was no timing out. There was no there was just 2 married people going on a honeymoon.
And boom.
Truly.
Things
like
happened.
We had, it was, we did a delayed honeymoon.
So
got married in June, went on a honeymoon in August, and found out in, I guess.
And then the following May, you had a baby. Yeah. So at the time, because it was so easy to conceive your first child, does that kind of give you a sense of, I don't know, false confidence might be the wrong word, but did it ever dawn on you that you would be sitting here, she's now 6, finally now having number 2?
No. I mean, I was completely ignorant to it, aside from the fact we had a couple of pastors who had been ever so slightly open about their journey with infertility, and they do have 3 kids now. And I remember Heath saying something to them about like, oh yeah, it just happened really easy for us. And I was like, oh, I've never been through that, but I'm pretty sure that stings. And now, of course, he meant nothing by it. He was just making conversation. And now I just am so sensitive to it with other people. I feel even being out in the world as a pregnant person, I know that there's people that see me every single day that are going through like the fight of their lives, not only in fertility, but just with their relationship. And trying to hold it together. And I know that how triggering that can be for people.
So looking back at when you had your first child, were there questions now in hindsight or information in hindsight that you wish you would have asked for right then and there?
1,000,000%. Also, I feel like, okay, yes, this is like a parenting podcast, family podcast, but this one's probably not to listen to with the kids, right?
Right, for sure.
So just, just putting it out there, unless you really want to have the birds and bees talk, like
anytime we talk about Santa and IVF.
So here's what I wish that somebody would have told me. I was 36 when I had Brighton. So advanced maternal age, already. I was already in that realm. And I just remember feeling really youthful, really vibrant, really healthy. I mean, it was like, oh, they call it a geriatric pregnancy. Haha. No, there's a reason for that. It's not to offend us. It's because there is biology at work. And so I wish that after I had her, somebody would have said, look, I know this is rough right now, but if you intend to have another child, you have to take action. You have to get your AMH tested, your FSH, your estradiol, and your thyroid. You just have to. Instead, I went back and got an IUD for a year, a couple years thinking, oh, well, we want to wait. But really, like, if you're smart about your family planning and you're in a position where you can and would like to, you really should get those things tested, because I would have frozen eggs.
Well, that was
right
my question.
away.
So what could have been, and I hate to call it, I hate to ask, well, what was the problem? Why did it take so long? But what kind of could have been the proactive solution maybe? I mean, is the solution at that point being like, okay, let me get through, let my body recover from just having given birth, and then let's harvest some eggs here?
Exactly. Yeah, because they say that you really shouldn't do it right away,
right,
just because your body has to sort of repair itself, and you're nursing if you choose to do so. But what somebody should have said is like, let's check these levels and see where you're at. So I don't have an infertility diagnosis. There is nothing wrong, quote unquote wrong with neither me nor Heath, but I am 41 and a half years old. And that is not typically, like at that point, I believe it's a 5% chance per month that you can get pregnant with a viable pregnancy. So we were on the decline and had no idea, even after one miscarriage. We had no idea. We thought, oh, well, this is so crazy. Well, I've come to find out, well, no, what's crazy is that nobody said, Jenny, look at how long you've been on Earth. This is what happens.
Right.
And so you need to be proactive. You need to look at all the different options. But it really took 3 miscarriages before we realized, all the testing in the world. And yes, there can be a specific niche test that identifies, that somebody is a carrier of something and that we need to do further testing. But truly, after 3 fertility doctors, it's advanced. It's beyond advanced maternal age now. I'm like super advanced, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Almost 42. So I wish somebody would have said, hey, girlfriend, freeze some eggs now.
So
wait.
So when did you realize? Because so you tried to start having, what would the plan have been? You wanted to have number 2 when?
I think when she was probably 3.
I was going to say 3
so
or
this
4,
has been about like a 3-year kind of journey.
And you, if I remember being at a playground at our kids' school. They hadn't even started school there yet. And your daughter said, my mommy has a baby in her belly. And I was like, oh, what?
Yeah.
I found
we hadn't
out
told her.
From your then 3-year-old told me.
Yeah. And we hadn't told her either, by the way.
Knew.
She knew. I mean, you could, I was just barely into the second trimester. I mean, if you've already had a child before, you usually kind of start to show around that time. Right. And she, family, if she sees you, she can tell. And so she kind of guessed it. And then she told you guys.
Totally.
And it was so exciting and so celebratory. And then we did, lean into it once she kind of guessed. We were like, yeah, you're going to have a baby sister.
And then you miscarried at how long?
It was right at the beginning of the second trimester, like 13 weeks.
So
14 weeks.
And again, if we, I like to think nothing's off limits here.
Nothing's off limits.
Okay,
because I think it's important to kind of give the real picture.
Right. And so we had the experience of miscarriage twice when we were pregnant. I'm not a woman though. I was not physically there for,
But you feel the loss.
1,000%. But
so
for
hard.
you, how did you know what was happening? I mean, what are the physical and then more importantly, what are the emotional journey that you go on?
I'm so glad you asked this because nobody had ever explained this to me. How did I make it this long in life and nobody had ever explained
what happens?
This is what happens. So this one I did start bleeding, which was the only time that happened, because then in subsequent pregnancies we had a lot more testing. But honestly, Steve, I woke up and I just knew.
Right.
I just felt like I could feel in my stomach she wasn't there anymore. I wish there was a better way to describe it. And then there was a little bit of bleeding. And so we went to a specialty doctor. I called into work. Heath called it, Heath, I'm like, trying to remember, where did he work at the time? He did. He actually worked for somebody. So he needed to call in. We had a midwife because we had already planned like this birth center birth. I mean, we had, everything was in place for this birth. And she suggested this sort of like emergency fetal medicine specialist. And we went there and she's the one that had to tell us, Jenny, there is no heartbeat.
So she did a scan.
She did a scan and we'd already had a really strong heartbeat too.
Is Brighton with you at this appointment?
No, thank God.
Okay.
No, she was at school. And so we had until, 2:00 that afternoon to sort of figure it out. And then you make the decision you usually have 3 options. You can do a DNC, which is a surgery. Right. You can do let it pass naturally, or you can do a medication that's actually really challenging to get now because of some of the changes in laws. Right. So for that one, I'm like, oh my gosh, what did we opt to do? I took the medication.
Okay.
and ended up hemorrhaging really badly. And it was really scary.
So are you at that point now thinking, oh my gosh, this might now never happen for us? Or are you like, okay,
No.
this is a roadblock, it's a speed bump, we're gonna get back on the horse, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, our doctor was just like, this happens sometimes to people. She said it does happen. I was like, yeah, but we had a strong heartbeat. Like we had a couple strong heartbeats. We were pretty,
you were in your second trimester as well.
Yeah. So, and she just said this just does happen. So I do, there's shoulda, coulda, woulda, but I'm kind of like, why didn't anybody be like, you are like, getting close to 39, 38, 39. This can happen more frequently because statistics show at that point, it's going to happen, about 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 times at that age.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up having 3 in a row, which is quite unusual.
Well, and I think that also we have this, and again, even me and my husband as men who have not spent a lifetime kind of future tripping about this, even we knew some of those, I don't want to call them like false markers, but those things that you feel like, oh, we're in the clear now.
Mm-hmm.
It's the second trimester. We can
Precisely.
tell people it's going to be, there's no way anything's going to go wrong now. But it does. And I think that it's important that people understand that.
Yeah.
And that it's totally normal.
And in a way, like I remember thinking like, why do people wait to tell people? Because in a way I look back and I'm actually really glad that Brighton had told you guys that day.
Right.
So you could know, even just like relate to, at that point you had been through this yourselves. And so, and by the way, we do want to do a separate podcast talking about that story because that's another story that needs to be shared as well. But in a way I'm like, well, I'm glad at least a couple people could kind of, empathize a little bit or know that we were kind of going through this. Mm-hmm. And I thought, of course, that the doctor said it's not that common to have happened this far along.
So you then get pregnant again.
Yep.
What do you do, if anything, differently this time in terms of like sharing it with Brighton or?
We did not tell her.
Right.
She did know.
She did know. She's very astute.
She's very astute. She studies things. She knows things. She talks. She didn't know. So this one was a boy and we had made it, got a heartbeat on him and we're pretty optimistic, although we knew that didn't necessarily mean anything.
Right.
But statistically speaking, once you make the heartbeat, it's usually pretty good.
We were always very superstitious. Like, actually, I was always I wouldn't buy anything for the baby's room.
Oh no, not by that point.
I wouldn't like none of those things. I was so afraid of I have the power in my infinite, smallness to influence any of this. But like, I just remember being like, oh, no, we can't. Please don't buy anything. I was like to my mom, please don't buy anything for the baby. Please don't. Yeah. I don't want to jinx it.
Well, it's the toxic room in my house, which is now the nursery that still sits there. You saw how close we are to having this baby and it sits there completely unprepared.
Right.
Because I think I'm still working through the idea of that we could be happy and like move on to a new chapter.
Right.
This chapter is so long.
Yeah.
And there's been such a lack of living, there's just a total lack of living and a lack of true joy when you're sort of fighting for something and feel like you're up against walls. So that room sat as a really messy, honestly disgusting office. We have a beautiful home that we really take pride in. And this one area that was supposed to be the baby's room
was kind of toxic.
It's just become cobwebby and weird. And I just look forward to the day that it will be, joyful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it hasn't been completed the way that it's kind of intended to, I think is kind of the difference there. Is there a point ever where you're like, you know what? I am so consumed by this that it's maybe robbing me a little bit of the now with my child who is here?
Good question. No, not of Brighton, but it definitely robbed me of Heath.
Oh, interesting.
Like, I think that I did a great job of maintaining presence with her and realizing like what I'm wanting is more of this.
Right.
So you have to be in more of this. So I think I can like applaud myself. Yes, I
did that.
I've been super whole with her. With Heath though, on the relationship side, it's so stressful. Because you're talking about, the treatments, hopefully if somebody's listening, like look into your insurance, look into every possible insurance component. Right. That wasn't a benefit that we had. So there's the financial component. There's the just like intimacy where it's like, is this fun anymore? This was supposed to be
because
fun.
It becomes a little clinical, especially in the kind of the next stage we'll get to. Is there maybe resentment isn't the right word, but do you feel some sort of way Heath's role, the man's role, is a very generally easy
Yes.
part.
Did I resent him for that?
A little bit, right? Or like, like, gosh, like why is my part not working? Do you get what I mean by that? Not that you're broken somehow, but like, why can you can do this till you're 90 and I can't,
Yeah, Andy's 5 years younger, so then it was just like double. And I did make him get all the tests, by the way, and which I highly recommend you do. If you've, if a woman's putting a lot of strain on herself, it's super cheap. Like the guys' tests are very easy, cheap, ever so slightly awkward, but not in comparison to what the woman has to do. But the first doctor that we went to just like took one look at him and was like, "Oh, he looks great." Looked at me and was like, "Listen, you senior citizen, we better, do all these things." And then the next doctor, I was like, no, like I'm sorry. Right. I had done enough research to realize there could be a male genetic factor or a factor that the two of us are putting together that's randomly not working out. So you get pregnant again for a third time. This was after we started a round of IVF. Right. Because they say to wait for 3 miscarriages, which I think is horrible advice because the resilience that it takes for somebody to make it through 3 miscarriages. Right. And then to do IVF. Well, and then through carrying a baby to term as well. That part. Yeah. That part, I forgot about that part. I think that advice is so peculiar. I think we really need to look at how much mental capacity somebody has to make it through that. I would never look at a friend of mine and say, just keep trying. Do. Right. It's different for everybody, but if the first one almost knocked you out, you got to go to a specialist. That one appointment is inexpensive and they can do some really simple tests without actually doing IVF. So we had started what they call a natural IVF cycle. Normally during IVF, you can't get pregnant. However, during this one particular type, I did. It was another boy. We were like, oh my gosh, what a gift. This must be so meant to be. I'm not going to have to go through IVF. Like, this is incredible. Right. We did it. Oh, we did it. Like, it was just such a relief. And then we got a heartbeat on him. But because we were checking so frequently, we lost it. It was more like the 8 or 9 week mark, so it was earlier. So I was glad. How did you know gender testing so early on? They can test that. Oh, they can. Mm-hmm. Well, actually after the fact. So I did do the collection, which if you have, it's like mental capacity, you know what you can do, but if you think you have the wherewithal to test, you can test for genetic components, you can test after the fact, but you have to do that collection on your own unless you have a DNC. So, and it's not for the faint of heart. I question whether it was the right thing all the time because I will have forever imprinted in me, collecting this itty bitty tiny little baby and sending him off to a lab. Yeah. But we got answers. Yeah. Exactly. And like what a roundabout special gift that baby did provide, because that baby did help you grow your family. Absolutely. And maybe that was his role in the universe, was to make the experience better for his surviving sibling, right? Do you feel at any point that you are kind of personally robbed of the idea or concept of choice because there's so much medical advice coming at you? I mean, are you ever feeling like, gosh, I don't want to wait for 3, but gosh, everyone's telling me to, so I don't feel like I am entitled to say, no, I want to do it my way. Yeah, no, because I did do it my way. After 2, I was like, I can't do this again. I need to go to an IVF specialist. Right. But yes, I kind of am like, I think this is like not nice advice because clinically speaking, yes, this may be good, but somebody's mental health is really important here. How do you get through that? I mean, because I see you regularly. I mean, and I remember one of them, you had shared something publicly on social media about a loss, and I was like, God, I didn't even know she was pregnant again, or that she had a loss. And I mean, I consider us to be relatively good friends. Yeah. Do you feel alone in this process? Totally. Because you're not telling friends, or because you feel like you're the only person who's had this experience because nobody else talks about it the way you do? Yeah, because nobody else talks about it. And then they want to talk about it after the fact. I'm like, girl, come to me. Where were you back then? But it's very isolating. And I also was so, like, I think about the first one, I'm like, I'm so glad that Brighton told them so they could understand. But it's like, well, Jenny's just going through this over and over and over. I mean, it was just so long. It felt like I don't want to drag people into my drama. When I see people, I want to like have fun and let our kids play and enjoy. And it just felt like so heavy and so peculiar for most people. And I know that a lot of people have dealt with loss in one way or another, but I felt a little bit just peculiar, a little bit strange, a little bit like, 3 times over this course of a year and a half, or I guess 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
I'm taking time off work to like process a baby, like doing the most intimate, strange, scary things. And then the next day, you just go back to work.
Right, with a smile on your face, telling people where they can get the best sushi in Dallas, right? Or whatever the case may be. The process then finally ends up being successful through IVF.
On our third doctor.
And I remember we had talked about, not a lot, but like even the idea of surrogacy. Like we were like, okay, like I was like, maybe you look, like what? So, and again, I don't want to be insensitive, but the question is, what did the problem end up being that you were able to navigate via IVF? And if that's not the right way
No,
to
that's
ask
a really
it,
good question. Right? That's a really good question. I kind of wish that I had understood this like on the front end too. So what we realized was I had a good house, good like
because you had no problem getting pregnant.
Exactly. So the issue was when you pass 35, your quality of eggs just goes way down. So it's something that happens to most people. Some people's will go on later. And I know some people listening, they'll be like, my cousin's aunt had a baby at 45. Like for sure that happens. Like Great. It definitely happens. It definitely happens at 40. I have plenty of friends that have had that happen. However, the more typical response will just be not getting pregnant. I was lucky because I was still getting pregnant, which meant I still had some pretty good eggs. So they just had to find one. And we found one. So after we started that first round of IVF, got pregnant and work, started a second round, did a full round, 14 eggs, 0 viable embryos.
Insane.
And then the next one. Because you kind of know the numbers yourself.
Well, and because we've been there where you're like, how is that possible? Yeah. How is that possible? 14, we fertilized 14, we have 14 embryos, and now you're telling me if I got pregnant with each one of them, they would have all been miscarriages.
They would have all been miscarriages or not taken at all.
Right.
More likely to not take it all. So then the next round we got 7. And of the 7, so we did do genetic testing on the embryos, which they recommend if you're of a certain age, just because you don't want to deal with miscarriages.
Well, and there was one. Well, let me ask you, but at this point, aren't you, how do you not test? To knowing what your numbers look like. How do you, was it even an option for you to be like, oh, we'll just roll the dice and hope that one of these is good?
Good question. Some doctors will let you and some won't. The third IVF doctor we went to, they would not let somebody of my age not test. However, there's also a theory that some of the embryos can sort of self-correct. And so some people will say, we'll do a day 3 embryo and just try, 5, try to put in as many untested as possible. Right. But after, that was something Heath was really uncomfortable with. He had seen me go through the 3 miscarriages. He said, I'm unwilling to do this. And I appreciate him, he's really putting me first. He's like, I'm unwilling to do this unless we know that this is a tested embryo. Right. Yeah. So,
and is there a danger? I'm trying to remember back to when we did genetic testing, and ours was more for gender because we wanted to select boys, also for viability. And we were, again, surprised that how few we had. And we had massive amount of eggs from our donor. But is there also a consequence potentially for that embryo? Yes. Because they remove cells from something that's only several cells large at that point.
Yes. And every doctor is going to tell you something different. I've noticed with regard to the risk, but you weigh
there is a risk
benefit. Yep. There is a slight risk of damage. And so they gave me with that, once you get to the 1, so a lot of IVF doctors are not taking patients that are 40 plus because
their numbers go down.
Well, because their numbers go down, and it's expensive, and it's a lot to put somebody through. And to know that you're going to offer this service and so few people are going to be successful with it, I think is hard for the doctors to handle. At first, I was like, that's so ageist and rude, and now I really understand it. I think it's more out of compassion.
Listen to my reaction, right? I'm like, it's bad for their numbers. Meanwhile, it's actually, it's
also bad for their numbers. Right. So we really had to find somebody that was willing and ready and excited about taking us on, and that believed in us and believed in our journey as parents. We were also really open, and I think it's super important to be open to things like surrogacy, like you mentioned, not carrying your own baby, but perhaps even using your own eggs, or gestational carrier surrogacy, 2 different things. But I was open to that. I did think it was going to be hard to think about if it was Heath's DNA and not mine.
I was going to ask that. So is that, and obviously in our situation, that is a reality because we're both dads. Although our egg donor was the same for both of the kids. Was there a process or a point at which you're thinking to yourself, I don't know if I want to cross the finish line and then know that I didn't genetically contribute?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, I still
okay.
struggle with that because I think just honestly, especially after I've been the one that's been through all of the physical components, and then to have, I think it would leave me feeling envious of Heath and feeling resentful. However, I say that, but I was still very open to it. I was still excited about the opportunity to potentially do that if it came down to that. And I think that would have been the next step if this didn't work. And we also went down the adoption route. There's a bunch of agencies that we've met with in the Metroplex. We've met with a lot of them, and we were really excited about that option too.
Well, and let me say for folks that are listening, kind of going through that process, I will spiral sometimes about the genetic relationship that I have or may not, because we don't know with our kids.
Yeah.
We did not find out. And then I think I get in my head about like, what if I'm neither? What if there was a mistake? What if, all that.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, especially as they get older, it doesn't really matter. Because what I'm seeing is the nurture part of it is I'm very much alive and present inside of both of them.
Absolutely. Your mannerisms. I say it with both your boys. You guys are twinning just in the way you pose or the way you smile or the way that you will remark on something. It is interesting. And I'd heard that a lot. And I think you're required to do, if it ends up being a female carrying another female's egg, you have to, do some specific counseling just to make sure you're okay with that. And I think that is wise.
Right. But what I do want people to know is it's okay to feel like that.
Yeah.
It's totally normal and human to think that, gosh, I'm going through all of this, and at the end, I don't want to be the one left out is the wrong way to say it. But essentially, that's the feeling.
Yeah. And I think I had to really think about ultimately, Heath and I are the start of this family.
Right.
And I don't want my jealousy or resentment or any of those kind of feelings, had we gone down that route, to ruin the initial bond that created the family.
Right.
And so, I had to be honest about that. It's not a proud feeling.
No, but I think it's a realistic
that's
one.
how I've felt. And I think that I think I would have I feel confident I would have gotten there because I really, really want a sibling for Brighton. I would have another if he would let me, but it's a definite no for him. But I just wanted, to have this happen. And I think that I would. And to your point, you blend together and grow together
100%.
as a family. Yeah.
So what's the takeaway here? Obviously, listen, if you are a woman of a certain age, you should think about maybe freezing eggs or at least start with the testing.
Get your testing done because we'll all vary a little bit. And I was blessed with excellent numbers. That's how I was even able to do it. So get them checked and ask, look that doctor in the eye and you make him or her say, what would you do if this was your daughter? If I was your daughter, what would you do?
Right.
And you don't let them squirm out of the office without telling you that, so that you can get a realistic perspective.
Is there a difficulty there? Sometimes you want to be an advocate for yourself, but you also don't want to be some,
psychopath,
whiny psychopath, right?
I ended up going the psychopath route, and it suited me quite well. Yeah, I think
I showed them I'm having a baby.
I've grown so much as a person, and sometimes I wonder if was this the lesson I needed to learn, was to advocate for myself. And to not feel bad about putting people out, to not feel bad about I have to take these vacation days or have to leave work early for testing for years. Years. My coworkers are probably like, is she a scam artist?
Is she ever going to not be pregnant?
Yeah. For years, I'm going to these appointments and these testings and things like that. But the takeaway is, if this is something you want, you will make it happen. In one way or another, there's so many creative family building options. But you can't just take your OB being like, oh, it's a fluke, you're fine, or I'm sure it'll happen one day. No, you have to kind of take it in your own hands. Okay, so let's wrap it up with this because we're a bit over time, but certainly worth every moment that we've been able to share together today. If there are people listening that are thinking, okay, but give me the takeaway. What are the resources? Where do I go? Yeah. Was there a website? Was there a support group? Was there a doctor you want to shout out to? So you want to go to SART Online, SART Online, and the CDC's website to get success rates for these clinics. They vary drastically. and you want to find out, get a diagnosis, make them give you a diagnosis. Do you have endometriosis? Are you old? Like me, it's fine. If you are, make them give you a diagnosis. Do you have endometritis? You have to get the diagnosis so that when you get that diagnosis, you find the specific doctor that deals with that. You don't go to a doctor that typically deals with premature ovarian, whatever issues. If you're somebody who's just wants to get pregnant and you're 45, like you've got to go to the specific person that deals with whatever your diagnosis is. And then you check the success rates. I mean, there's some really bad success rates out there. So, check, and you can DM me and message me and I'll tell you where I went and what worked and, what didn't. But I think that you just have to be really, really savvy and really ruthless and make sure that you and your partner are really strong to go through it.
That's a whole topic for another day.
Yeah.
I would imagine that there had to be a lot of very difficult conversations to have with one another.
Yeah.
Ours was too, and
Of
it's funny because
course.
Doug was very much like, we'd miscarry and be like, oh, don't worry about it. It'll happen. The universe is providing. And I'm like, no, like
No.
we have to find another surrogate and we have to find this and we can do all these other things. Listen, I cannot wait to hold this baby. I'm so excited. If you'll I promise I'll wash my hands and wear a tinfoil hat and the whole thing.
Thank you, tinfoil hat, but also be vaccinated.
I'll boil
but
my
also-
clothes and I'll do all of the things. Congratulations.
Thank
and
you so
again,
much.
thank you for using the platform that we've been able to build to help hopefully educate people and make a little bit of a difference in other folks' lives. So we invite you to continue to tune in to all of our episodes. You can even listen to back episodes if you want to. Go ahead and take a look. We would love to have you. New episodes every Tuesday morning. And if you do nothing else today, go find yourself a friend you don't need to clean the house for. We'll see you soon.